Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the 2014 Chess Olympiad. Our countries facing off today are South Africa and the United States of America. White's going to be played by South African Kenny Solomon, international master, and black's going to be played by the top American, and that's Nakamura, one of the top players in the world. So definitely an exciting match. Both countries definitely looking for some points, especially America. Haven't gotten off to the best start, so definitely looking to capture a point in this particular match. But it's going to be difficult. Nakamura playing the black pieces definitely has to find something where he can find an advantage and go for the win. So we'll go ahead and get started. Starts out with pawn to d4. Pawn to d5, knight f3, knight f6, and then we see the queen's gambit with pawn here to c4. Nakamura decides to start with the semi-tirage, pawn here to e6, and then after knight to c3, pawn down to c5. Because he has his knight here on f6, it plays a little bit differently because after the pawn captures, black is not going to capture with his own pawn and have an isolated pawn here on d4. Instead, he's going to capture with his knight here on d5. This is definitely thought to be a very sound defense from black. I don't see it all the time, but definitely black has a lot of fighting chances in this particular defense. So we see pawn here to e4, trying to break up the center of the board, making sure white controls that. Knight taking here, pawn recapturing. So if we kind of look at it right away, white's controlling the center of the board, which is exactly what Kenny wants to do. But he does have a backward pawn here on c3, so something that Nakamura may be looking to take advantage of later into the game. But both sides are more than likely just going to develop as normal. There's no weaknesses right now. Both sides still have their double bishop pair. So we just continue with the pawn taking, pawn recapturing. Now the bishop's going to come down here to b4, just developing pieces, getting ready to castle. White's forced to take with his bishop, or to come here to d2. He can't bring his knight down here. The queen's just going to come down to d4 capture. That's definitely going to be very, very bad for white. So white's forced to come here to d2. Nakamura's okay with just exchanging material off the board. He castles. Then we see the bishop come here to c4. So both sides really not getting out of hand. Nakamura definitely playing a more defensive, passive style, just okay to get pieces off the board, and then looking to dominate his opponent in kind of that middle to end game. We now see knight to d7, castle on the king side, pawn here to b6, getting ready to activate his light square bishop. Then we see the rook's going to swing over here to e1, getting the rook involved. White's completed his development, so white's definitely ahead on board right now. He's controlling the center of the board. His light square bishop is doing a great job controlling the center. His knight here on c3 is exactly where you want to go. His rook over here on e1 is fine. It's protecting this pawn here, pushing forward. Definitely want to get his other rook involved. It's already connected, so that's good. But it makes a lot of sense to bring it to b1, semi-open file, or even c1. This is also good. It's an open file. Those always where you want your rooks to be. From Nakamura's side, he already has his king protected, so that's fine. He's going to look to activate his light square bishop, get both of his rooks involved, find a great square for his queen, and then try to find a weakness in white's setup on board. But right now there are no weaknesses. We see bishop come here to b7 as we talked about. This bishop is eyeing down, attacking the square here on e4. Now Kenny decides to go and bring his rook over here to d1. I don't necessarily think he has to do this. It's not a terrible move, but he already has protection. He has his queen here on d2, his knight here on f3, both defending this square. He could have easily brought his rook over here to c1, opened up the door, trying to control this long c file. That's exactly what Nakamura does, though. He decides to go ahead and bring his rook over here to c8, attacking this bishop and trying to control this long file. The bishop comes back here to d3, knight here to f6, attacking both this pawn here on e4, also opening up the door for an attack on the square here on d4. So Nakamura has done a really good job of navigating, completing his development, getting all his pieces, trying to counter in the center of the board. He has a little bit more on the offensive right now. White's just kind of playing defense right now, but kind of the lanes are open for black to kind of take control of this game. But white's starting to add a lot of pressure on the square here on e4. White can take somewhat of an aggressive stance. He could play pawn here to h3, blocking the knight to g4, which seems good because right now black can't really threaten too much. White could also try to take away some of the pressure on the middle of the board and play pawn here to a4. Black, it's really difficult to ever defend two parts of the board. Right now, just have to worry about the center. But a4 starts to put more pressure on the queen side, so that's definitely one of the options. Solomon decides to go for a little bit more of a passive approach than I would have preferred, and that's bishop back here to b1. Now the bishop's kind of out of play. It is still defending the square here on e4, but it's not as active as white would like to be on board. Now we see the rook swing over here to e8. Queen to f4, so that's definitely a much stronger square. The queen's going to come up here to c7. Pretty interesting that Nakamura is ready to exchange queens off the board, but I guess he likes the setup after the queen takes and the rook takes here on c7. He feels like this is going to be okay. He has control of this open file here on the c file. He can bring his rook over. He has both his bishop and his knight attacking the square right here, so maybe he finds something in this particular case. Solomon actually decides to go a different route and play knight here to e5, which is always interesting. I think it's great that, you know, players in this particular case, Kenny Solomon, a much lower rated player than Nakamura. Usually you're going to want to trade off your queens, your rooks, just try to get to an end game, possibly a draw. Maybe if Nakamura makes a mistake, you can bring out a win. But in this particular case, he decides to go ahead and stick with his big guns. He doesn't want to give up his queen. He still feels like he has the initiative, which he does. White has a small lead on this game right now. So really, really cool, I thought, watching this game to actually see him go for the win. We now see the rook swing over here to d8, and then pawn here to g4, starting to push forward, put a lot of pressure on the king side. All of a sudden, white went from the passive move of bishop here to b1, all of a sudden very, very aggressive. Queen here to f4, bringing his knight very centralized, all of a sudden pushing forward with pawn here to g4. Nakamura just really doesn't want to have to deal with this, the pawn pushing forward to g5, putting this knight in a very awkward situation. Decides to go ahead and bring his rook back over here to f8. Then we see this rook swing over here to c1, attacking this queen here on c7, trying to open up the door for the c file. He doesn't want to give Nakamura full control of that. The queen's going to come over here to a d6. After the exchange on board, the queen comes back here to e3, and then now the rook feels like it's safe to come back here, putting a lot of pressure. He now has this rook and his queen here on the d file attacking this pawn. The rook's going to swing over here to c1, knowing that if there is an exchange on board right here, then the rook can just swing up here and take this bishop. So Nakamura is not going to allow that. So although he doesn't have two defenders on the square here on d4, he somewhat has a defender with this rook here on c1 attacking this bishop up here. Now the bishop's going to come here to b7, more of a natural square for this bishop. You definitely don't want to have it on the 8th rank, and this is eyeing down the long diagonal that he wants to control with his light square bishop. Pawn to g5, as we talked about, forcing the knight to go back there to e8. The knight's going to come back here to f3, and then we see the queen come back, opening up the door to attack this pawn here on d4. Pawn to h3, odd move to me. I don't understand why he just wouldn't play pawn here to h4. This is definitely one of those where I wish I could go talk to the player afterwards. I think h4 just makes more sense. Adds more pressure, adds a defender on this pawn here on g5 if Kenny decides he wants to move his knight and his queen away. But also if he decides he wants to start pushing forward a little bit more, h4 just seems like a better square than h3. He's not really protecting too much with h3. But that's what he played. Queen over here to b4. Nakamura getting on the offensive, recognizing that there's not much he has to worry about on board right now, so gets his queen involved as much as possible. Queen over here to c3, and all of a sudden it looks like Kenny Solomon is okay to exchange queens off the board. He doesn't feel like he has strong enough of an attack to actually go for the win, so he decides to go ahead and try for the trade. Nakamura could try for the trade, so after the queen takes here, the rook takes, the knight can come down here to d6. This feels like it's okay, but maybe Nakamura sees something a little bit different, decides he wants to hold on to his material. He plays queen here to a4, attacking this pawn here on a2. Kenny makes an interesting move. He plays bishop here to c2. Nakamura could easily just come down here and take here on a2, but we could see the rook swing over. This rook swing over here to c8. We could see an exchange of pieces come off the board right here. Nakamura may just look at this and decide that he still wants his queen on board, even if he has probably a little bit better position right now. He decides instead of taking that pawn on a2 to instead swing his queen back here to d7, start to add more pressure on this pawn here on d4. So queen to d3, knight to d6, definitely wants to improve his square with his knight. Being back here on e8 wasn't doing too much for anything. The queen coming back here to e2. This queen's really moving around. Kenny Solomon's not really improving his position too much. He's kind of relegated to defend the squares that Nakamura is attacking. Right now, Nakamura is attacking the square here on e4. He already has his knight lined up. He's got his bishop lined up. And so that's kind of what Nakamura's plan is. And Kenny Solomon, again, playing defense. Nakamura continues to add pressure. He brings his rook over here to c8, trying to control this long file. Rook over here to d1. Queen to c6, as we talked about, adding more and more pressure to this square here on e4. Kenny Solomon's forced to kind of break this up, and so he does that. Pawn capturing. The rook now captures. The rook's going to swing over here to e8. Nakamura switching his attention now to this pawn over here on e4. Queen to d3. The knight's just going to capture right here. Nakamura's just going to go up in material. There's no way to defend all the attacks right here. And so we do see the rook swing up here to d8, the king coming over here. Doesn't want to exchange. That would be very, very bad, because then the queen would just come up here and it would be a quick checkmate. And so we see the knight come up here to e5, attacking the queen. The queen's going to swing back here to c7, attacking both the knight and this rook up here on d8. So Kenny Solomon's pretty much forced to take. We do see an exchange right here. The queen coming up here attacking. And this is going to be great for Nakamura. Again, he's up in material right now. He's up a pawn. So if he can just exchange all the pieces on board, this is actually going to be really, really good for Nakamura. He goes into the end game with pretty much a one game in hand. So we see the bishop take. Nakamura is completely okay with that, to take with his bishop. The queen's going to come down. King to c8. And then Nakamura decides he wants to go ahead and trade off those pieces as well, which is okay with Kenny Solomon, which is kind of weird. And now Nakamura plays queen to e5, opening up the door for a trade. If there was a trade right here, all of a sudden Nakamura has 4 pawns to his opponent's 3. He could easily centralize. It's going to be a lost game for Kenny Solomon. He decides he doesn't want to give up his queen, but instead he's going to give up a pawn. Now he is able to fight back a little bit. He could just take back some material on board. After the king moves, he could just take this material if he wanted to here on f6. But now the queen comes in. He's no longer able to do that, and he recognizes that he's now down 2 pawns in material. He can't do too much on board. He can only chase the king around too much. Nakamura, going into the end game, just has too much material. It probably would be a long game just because Kenny Solomon has a queen on board, but it's just no use in actually playing these. And it's one of those cases where at high level play, you're just going to concede in this spot. I wish they would play it out, but they don't. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Really, really good to get Nakamura on board with a good win for the American team. Hopefully they can continue their momentum and actually have a strong showing here. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next video. Definitely hope you guys are watching all of the stream of the Chess Olympiad. They definitely have some cool stuff if you check out that website. You can also check out my website. I've got out more videos of the Chess Olympiad, trying to do at least a couple a day, if not one or more. So definitely check that out, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.